Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about the LGB Alliance Conference that was held on April 18th on Saturday in London. It was the first LGB Alliance Conference I have ever been to. It was called the Let's Go Big Conference. And I was really blown away by how well everything went and how awesome it was. There were hundreds of people there. So it was the biggest conference I've been to that had a sort of, in sort of the wider anti-gender ideology sphere, you could say. Um, Certainly the biggest LGB event I've been to. And this was a big conference for LGB International because it was the first conference where LGB International had a presence, because LGB International was only created last year. And so there were two panels for LGB International, and I participated in both of them, one as a panelist and another one as the moderator. The first one was moderated by Daniel from Colombia, and I came as a representative of the United States. There was also Lynn, who came from Sweden, Nick from Taiwan, Vasil from Bulgaria, and Jose from Colombia, and they talked about the status of LGB rights in their countries, both old school homophobia and sort of this new school woke gender ideology homophobia. And for me, coming from the US, it's so hard to talk about the national government in all 50 states in just 3 to 4 minutes. So I did mostly focus on California because that's where I'm from, and the San Francisco Bay Area. I talked about the work LGB Alliance does with Women Are Real and San Francisco Turf Central at trying to stop really bad California legislation. It's already bad to have so much gender ideology, gender identity in the law in California, but it's, believe it or not, getting worse. So I talked about that. And then for the second panel, which I moderated, we had as our panelists Renato Sabadini, who is the former executive director of ILGA, an organization that was formerly dedicated to, gay, lesbian, bisexual rights, but then since added the I and the T and the Q and the blah, blah, blah. And so Renato became disillusioned with ILGA and left. And he began by talking about a topic that came up in the Q&A for the first panel, which was actually the Yogya Karta principles, which a lot of people blame for spreading gender identity around the world. And Renato said he wanted to set the record straight on that and the Yogyakarta principles and the role that ILGA played in that, saying, the Yogyakarta principles may have actually started with some good intentions at trying to protect gay rights, but then went off the rails. And the other panelists included Sarah, who's a bisexual woman from Bangladesh, Kizar, who's a gay man from Pakistan, and Teresa, a lesbian asylum seeker from Mozambique. And they talked about their experiences as an LGB person in their respective countries. And the sort of next round of questions, Sarah and Kizar elaborated on the Hijra tradition in South Asia, which is sort of what is sometimes referred to as like the third gender tradition of South Asia. It's basically gay men who dress as women and sort of emulate the lives of women, that they're not considered women traditionally, but they sort of are in this third category. And Kizar talked about how in Pakistan there really isn't much discussion about gay people or gay rights. It's all about hijra. So it's sort of like the trans option in some sense is given more attention than just being a gay guy. And Sarah talked about how there was a problem where there are these quotas in, the Bangladesh government for women, and how a huge number of them are now being taken up by these hijra, in part due to Western influence. This whole idea of trans women are women, resulting in trans women taking over roles that were, supposed to protect women, to promote women's rights. And Teresa from Mozambique talked about how in Mozambique, there is just gay, and so when she encountered all this LGBTQ stuff, she didn't really get, like, for her, she had a pretty easy time understanding the distinction between the LGB and the TQ plus. She said it was very simple. They're different things. And then we sort of ended with talking about what organizations like LGB International can even do to help gay people and lesbian, bisexual people in the global south and countries that might still be grappling with old school homophobia, because we don't want to come across as these imperialists who are just trying to impose our culture on other countries. We don't want to, we kind of already screwed up with trying to promote gender identity in these countries. We don't want to make the same mistakes that organizations like ILGA did. And Renato Sabatini made the point that he was pretty skeptical that there's much that organizations like ours can do or should do to help people in the global south. He said, it's up to people from the countries in the global south to, start their own gay rights movements, and we can support them once they're started, but we don't want to make it sound like we're the ones pushing the agenda. And we had a good dialogue with the other panelists. Like, for example, I remember Kizara brought up how when we're in our own country, we have more influence on what the governments of our own country can do compared to what the governments in other countries do. So we can pressure our own governments to work with other countries to improve the status of LGB rights in those countries. But we're not going to have a whole lot of impact on the homophobic country in question directly. And you had Teresa talk about how countries like Mozambique, is often assumed to be an okay place to be gay, or at least that's what a lot of people say about it, but in fact the rhetoric doesn't match the reality. In fact, the reality is that it's a very horrible place in many ways to be an LGB person, and so we need to be careful when we work with these other countries that we actually see the reality of what's going on in these countries and not believing the narrative that everything's fine. And Sarah talked about how it's important, for example, to platform the voices of people within these cultures to promote, more understanding of homosexuality. Like, for example, she pointed out to some how some Muslims are trying to challenge the Quran, the common interpretation that the Quran condemns homosexuality, that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah found in the Bible and the Quran, challenging the assumption that that story was about homosexuality at all. And so we should amplify and platform the voices of people who are trying to challenge homophobia from within their communities. And I thought that, and, rather than just try to condemn other countries or other cultures or not understand these other cultures, we should, work with people within these cultures who are trying to change them from within or whatnot. I think that, I hope I'm not, I could go on and on and on about it, but I don't want to misrepresent anyone or put words into anyone's mouth. I'm just trying to summarize what I remember hearing from the panelists, because I thought it was a very thoughtful panel, and I'm really proud of the panel and everyone who participated in it. And I should also say the whole conference was a great learning experience for me. There was one panel that was just dedicated to Generation Z. That was pretty cool to have so many young people stand up. Their panel, that was a dialogue with a gay detransitioner. There was also a panel, a panel hosted by Frederick from LGB International, who interviewed Mark Smith, who is talking about thoughts aren't facts, what happened to therapy, and talks about why therapy went wrong and ended up being a voice for gender ideology, and rather than trying to help people with gender dysphoria come to terms with their body. One thing I liked about the conference was how there were all these little groups that had their own, or all these separate groups that had their own little booths set up. And, you know, like they had a WDI booth, and there was a booth dedicated to gay Christians or LGB Christians, and there was a group, Human Gay Male was there. I've interviewed him before. Nice to say hi to him in person. And also at the end, I remember there was a panel. I had like lawyers and an ex-parliamentarian from the Labor Party there. And it was interesting because there was actually a little bit of a friendly argument that broke out there about, you know, I don't know the details about all the British politics, but, you know, it was things like, it was about how close you are still to the Labor Party. Like, you know, like someone was saying how she still feels sympathy for the Labor Party, even though they've gone wrong on the gender issue, and also brought up how the European Union, even though they've done some harmful stuff in promoting gender ideology, how they're, in some sense, I think it was like their judicial system can still be quite helpful in promoting LGBT rights, and someone disagreed with her on that. And anyway, the point is that I liked how there was this internal dissension within LGB, because just because we're all LGBs doesn't mean we all have to agree on everything. And I don't want the LGBT movement to be yet another ideological cult the way TQ Plus has. I think we should be able to harbor internal dissent. So that was another thing about the conference I liked. And overall it was fun. There was a disco that happens at the end. So if any of you out there are listening, and you haven't been to an LGB Alliance conference, I encourage you to go next time there is one, because I think it's a great experience and you'll learn a lot, and it's a lot of fun. So with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and remember, LGB Alliance USA hosts various events on Zoom for LGBT people to meet, socialize, and talk about current events and topics of interest. For a full schedule of our upcoming meetings, please go to lgbausa.org/upcoming-events. Hope to see you again, and remember to like and subscribe.